Welcome back to our second Our Heritage program. We are so glad you decided to join us again. Today we will start our program with Ken Vickers. I've known Ken quite some time. He is from Ambrose and a local boy, and today he's here to talk to us about Peter Vickers. Welcome, Ken.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Been looking around all this old stuff that we used to use when I was a boy, and it reminds me how old I'm getting. We're here to talk about one of the greatest men this county ever produced of any race. He happened to be a black man who had been a slave of my great-great-grandfather, Eli Vickers I. And I was looking over here, there's a board of famous or black people who have done so much for Coffee County. Most of them are my age or a little older. Not one mention is ever made of Peter Vickers. And again, I say he's got to be one of the greatest men this county ever produced, because he was a man who came from slavery. 30 years later, he was the wealthiest black man in the state of Georgia. One of the wealthiest men, and he had to be pretty sharp to attain that. Now, he was born in 1840 as I said, to Eli Vickers I, who died in 1851. His ownership then went to Rebecca Paul Vickers, and she, at the end of the Civil War, of course, the slaves were freed, and she gave him a farm that his descendants still live on today out on the Dollar Brock Road. Now, at that particular time, during the war, it was told the damn Yankees were going to kill all the livestock. Well, you had to have a mule. Back in those days, if you wanted to live, you had to have something to plow the ground, or you starved to death. So when they found out the Yankees were coming, they never did, but they thought they were, they moved all the livestock over into the swamp, except for the cattle. They didn't want the cattle with them to keep them from lowing, and the Yankees being able to know where they were. So they kept the horses and the mules all over there until the coast was clear and they came out. Well, the war got over with, and Rebecca gave him his farm where his descendants lived, as I stated. My great-grandfather went to him because he was such, what you would call today, a mule whisperer. He had a way of harness breaking a mule to where they would gee and haw. You could plow with the thing, so therefore the mule, if he was wild, he was worth nothing. But if you could plow him, he was something. That was a John Deere tractor of the day. Well, they went into business together on halves, and before you know it, every time Peter got hold of $1, he bought an acre of land. And by 1895, he owned 12,000 acres in one block, which include all the Bay Meadows, the Baker Farm, the Dormany Farm, across the road St. Ella Church, the Vickers property, the Dormany property, the Harpers, right on up toward Ambrose it went. At 12,000 acres in just one block. Now, I'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a minute. Now, the first mention ever made of Peter Vickers was in 1895 in the newspaper, the Macon Telegraph, because his house caught fire and burned down, and 7 of his children died in that house fire. One other child from another family, but 7 of Peter's children were killed, so that left him with only 3. He had a son named Bud, one named George, and a daughter Mary. His wife's name was Betsy. The next time you see anything mentioned in 1898, it was told in the county paper about the wool that was sold in Coffee County, because Peter had bought a huge sheep herd, and that's what they ran, that cattle and sheep. They sold 25,000 pounds of wool in the year of 1898. So that's what helped Peter to prosper, as well as timber, sawmilling, and just being a good businessman. And also in 1898, he had one of the first turpentine leases ever recorded in Coffee County to the J.S. Betts Company. My great-grandfather had one, several other people, and that was really the beginning of the demise of the sheep industry, because once turpentine came in, the sheep, he came up there and rubbed up against that turpentine face, got a all in his farm, no good. They had to do something. Either the sheep had to go or turpentine had to go. And so the sheep went and turpentine stayed until the mid-1960s. Now, the next mention made in anything, and this is what astounds me, is such a great man, so little is known about him. There's not even a photograph existing today to my knowledge. I've gone to his family, and the one they did have was in storage. Somebody broke into the storage building and stole they were remodeling their home, stole the photograph, stole everything. So we don't even know what he looked like now. But in 1901, Peter, who was a very civic-minded man, he was a national Republican and a local Democrat, like a lot of folks are today. He started or wanted to begin what was called the Negro Colonization Plan. Now, the newspaper that reported on it, the Savannah Morning News, wasn't real charitable. They were overtly racist and threatening when they found out what he was trying to do, which was bring 2,000 former slaves and their families to this farm. They were going to put up a sawmill, a turpentine still, clear some land, farm, do all that, and give them an opportunity to learn and to prosper, because really they didn't have a chance. After the Civil War was over, the damn Yankees went home and just left all the black folk. Well, they didn't have anything to do but drift into sharecropping, which was nothing but another form of slavery that existed right on up until I was a grown boy. Anyway, we don't know what happened with the colonization plan. It was reported in 1901 in the Savannah Morning News that Peter Vickers was the president, J.A. Jones vice president, C.G. Cobb the secretary, and G.P. Washington the treasurer of the Colony Association. And they had obtained $17,000 of the $25,000 they needed to start it. So we don't know anything else about it. It just, that there's no further mention ever made of it, and Peter died in 1903. We don't know if that was the end of it. We just don't know. There's nothing that we can find out. Also in 1901 in the newspaper, it talked about Peter buying stock in the B&B Railroad, which was a spur of the Woodley and Mount Vernon Railroad that was coming through here. And that's what really got everything going, was the railroads, because we had to have some way to haul out the timber and whatever goods we could produce here at that particular time. And the next mention you have of Peter Vickers was in 1903. The Savannah Morning News again gave his obituary, and it stated that he owned some 30,000 acres of land and timber, as well as other property and stock in the railroad. He was a primitive Baptist preacher, a national Republican, a local Democrat, and the wealthiest black man in Georgia at his passing, and that all his land was gained by honest toil. That's a direct quote from the newspaper. They called him an antebellum Negro in that particular column. That was before the war. His funeral was attended. I remember my people talking about it, as I've heard of him all my life, naturally, because my family was close to him. They all thought the world of him. They respected him highly. He was said to be a very humble, very scrupulously honest man, and just a decent man. They all thought a lot of him. So they had a big funeral, of course, and his wife Betsy used to come and stay with my grandfather and grandmother, spend the night with them. Uncle Katie used to talk about it, and they would go, and when they were having roundups back in those days, cows, and they'd stay over there at what they call Aunt Betsy's place. She had a room just for them. Had a nice home. Now, I've said it before and I'll say it again. To come from slavery and in 30 short years to becoming the richest black man and one of the richest men in the state of Georgia is a great accomplishment. I don't care who you are. He was a great man. And the thing that really makes me excited about him, he didn't have a dad blame soul from the federal government to try and help him. He did it all on his own. Every bit of it. With nothing but hard work and just being a decent man. It's a magnificent story, and I wish somebody at the college, some of the young people, would take this on as a project to try and find out more about this man. Mr. Christie Travel got a lot of this information here. That's where I got some of it from, and I talked to a lot of Peter's people, And the only other woman I knew who knew his wife, Betsy, who she's passed in the last 2 years, Rebecca Edie, she was my next door neighbor. She told me who and all the people came, their children were. My Uncle K.D.'s farm was always called the Bud Place. You know, all these farms got names.
Yeah,
the
they all do.
Place, the Bud Place. I never knew why it was called the Bud Place until I talked to Miss Rebecca Edie. Bud Vickers, Peter's son, was given that farm after Betsy died, and he sold it to my grandpa, Macaja. Katie got it, so they called it the Bud Place. That's how it got its name. Now, I don't know what happened to all the rest of the land. I think George and Bud just had a good time, from what I can understand. You know, easy come, easy go. I don't know what happened to the daughter, Mary. There's just so little information to gather. But it's an interesting story, and like I was talking to one of my friends, Isaac Brock, we call him, and he has some information about it, the old stories that were told, because he used to live there in that old home place. He said, Ken, everybody's dead and gone that knew about this, just about it. He said, just make up something and tell it. Don't nobody know the difference. So if anybody wanted to make a movie about something that really would be interesting, this would be it.
It would be.
Say it'll happen. Who knows?
Chris Trial was the first one that mentioned it to me, and he said, Carol, you need to get behind this and find out. And I said, well, who would know? He said, Ken Vickers' family was involved in all this. Mm-hmm. And that's when I found the obituary in the paper, and what I found that was interesting, I didn't find very much in the Coffee County papers. Mm-hmm. But Savannah and Macon, every time something happened, Peter was there. Mm-hmm. It was just amazing to me that you have to, once again, you have to go away from home to find out about home folks sometime.
Yeah.
But I am so glad you came today. This is going to get so many people interested. And if anybody would like to take on this project, come by the museum and I'll get you started with information, and we'll get you in touch with Ken, and he can share some more stories with you.
I surely can, except on me. Now, Peter is buried at Sunnyside Church on the Donnie Harper Road, if anybody's interested. And there's also another big fine monument there. It's a black cemetery, a family named Phillips. I never knew them, but they must have been some pretty well-off folks themselves to
have that cemetery.
A fine grave marker. So anyway, you might want to look into that too. But that's where Peter and his wife are buried.
Well, I appreciate it so much, Ken. Thank you so much for coming and sharing with us.
Don't miss the South Georgia Outdoor Expo in Douglas. It starts with a wild game supper with Dr. Griff Lindsay as the guest speaker on falconry. Then 2 days of fun activities for the whole family, including the Ultimate Outdoors World Record exhibit. Captain Clint Roberts and the Kraken Dave Stone of the Dreadnoughts from the TV show Axemen. Georgia Southern University's Center for Wildlife Education's American Bald Eagle and their Reptiles and Raptors show. Fishing workshop with Bert Diener. Turkey culling contest. Ziggy's Comedy Magic Show. And more. You could win a $500 jackpot, a Synergy cargo trailer, or other great prizes. This show is brought to you by these great partners. Don't miss it.
We're now going to speak to Miss Mary Clyde Scott. I'm so excited about this again. I look forward to this all month long. I really do.
Thank you.
So today Miss Scott is going to be talking about streets in downtown Douglas.
Yes.
Well, tell us when streets actually got their name.
Well, I thought I'd tell you a little bit today about how some of the streets got their name, and maybe something about the men who they were named for as well. We might start with how Douglas got its name.
Okay.
And there are two schools of thought. Some people think that Douglas was named for Stephen A. Douglas, who was a senator and also a national politician who was sympathetic to the South concerning slavery. And so the South favored him, and some people